We have been stuck in a fight since the Reformation about faith and works. And today's second reading is the one that all the Catholics know, which is faith without works is dead. But then, of course, we dialogue with the Lutherans, and they use Romans, and they say, well, salvation is through faith. Luther added the word alone, but the point still stands. Salvation is through faith, according to St. Paul. So, how do we resolve that? How do we get out of this 500-year back and forth? I would commend to us that we take a broader view of the word faith. Now, to be honest with St. James, he is using faith in the way that we often use it, which is the series of intellectual propositions. He is talking about you believe in God, that's an intellectual thing. And you can tell because in that same passage, although it's not quoted here, he says, you have faith, good for you, the demons believe God exists too. So what does that do for you? That's paraphrased, but he says it. He says, the demons believe in God, so what good is faith if the demons also have what you are describing as faith? But we as Catholics, we need to be careful here because we haven't made any progress on this question for 500 years. The Catholics and the Protestants were going back and forth. The Lord would desire our churches to be reunited. And even beyond that, we as Catholics can't let ourselves fall into this belief that the Scriptures are somehow contradictory. We can't pit St. James against St. Paul. It doesn't work. So what do we do? How do we grow from here? The thing that unlocked it for me was the year I studied Biblical Greek. We read parts of the letter to the Corinthians. And in the letter to the Corinthians, there's this phrase that St. Paul uses. He says, pistis ha theos. Now, pistis is the Greek word for faith, and theos is the Greek word for God. What he's doing is it's a predicate nominative. That's a grammatical structure where you have two nouns that are linked by a verb of being. So when St. Paul in his gospel says, the Word was God, you have two nouns, Word and God, and there's an equal sign between them. The Word was God. This construction St. Paul uses doesn't even put the verb in there, but pistis ha theos means that God is faith. That's what he's saying. God is faith. Which doesn't really make sense. We can't, what does it mean to say God is faith? You won't see an English translation translate the letter to the Corinthians with that phrase. All the English Bibles say God is faithful. And I don't think that's a bad translation. If we see pistis ha theos, St. Paul is saying that God is faithful. But what it reminds us is that this word in the New Testament has a lot of nuances to it. That it's more than just a series of intellectual propositions, but that somehow faith is something that God himself can be. God is certainly more than a list of intellectual propositions. We only exist because we exist in the mind of God. So, in a sense, he does have faith in us because he holds us in existence. But he is also faithful to us. When St. Paul says, pistis ha theos, he's saying, God is faithful. And I would argue, even though St. James has the more intellectual view of faith in mind, the series of propositions, that what he's calling us out on, and this is one of the Catholic letters, it was written to the whole church, what he's calling Catholics out on is faith is deeper than the way you're using it. Faith is deeper than intellectual propositions. Faith has more of the richness of the way St. Paul uses it later in Corinthians. Fidelity, faithfulness. So to get our mind around this idea, I find marriage analogies to be very helpful. What does it look like when a married couple has faith in each other? I would say this intellectual view of faith, this series of intellectual propositions, that's kind of like the vows. You're standing at the altar and you are saying things like, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, till death do us part. I believe these are the things. These are the things I intend to do. Fidelity, that later faithfulness, often looks like the difficult decision that is made together. For example, we see this when one of the spouses gets a new job across the country, and the whole family picks up and follows them to that. That's hard on the entire family, and it's hard especially on all of those who don't have a shiny new job that they're looking forward to. But in fidelity to each other, the couple does something difficult together. They walk together in fidelity. Or similarly, if somebody has a terminal illness, one of the spouses is diagnosed with a cancer, which requires a long series of treatments, and that spouse is just unable to be as present as they used to be, the other spouse steps up, takes up more of the family responsibilities, walks with that spouse in the good times and the bad, in the sickness and the health, and the ups and the downs. That's what fidelity looks like. Another one, and this is a harder one that I've seen, sometimes a spouse will have a conversion moment. So maybe when they were married, they were both secular atheists, or they were both fallen away Catholics, or whatever else, and then one spouse has this deep existential searching. Oh, my life doesn't make sense. I'm supposed to be living for something deeper. I've fallen away from God. I want to reconnect. There's this big conversion. Some of the most beautiful stories I've seen is where the spouse who really has no interest in religion tries their best to walk with the spouse who has converted, tries their best to support raising the kids Catholic, tries their best to go to Mass from time to time, to have conversations about these deeper questions that are suddenly part of the marriage that weren't there when they made their first vows. In a sense, you might say, faith is the starting point. It's the thing we do at the beginning. And to go back to a religious analogy, it might be saying, I believe the tenets of the creed. Fidelity is living out those tenets when it's difficult, when it's hard, when we really need to build towards something. Look at our readings. St. Peter has faith. Jesus asked the apostles, who do people say that I am? And St. Peter gives the right answer. He says, you are the Christ. And in that statement, he's saying, I believe that you are the one that was promised by God and all of the Scriptures. You're the anointed one. You're the one who will lead Israel to salvation. Right? That's a loaded statement, and he makes the right statement. I believe that you are the Christ. And he speaks on behalf of the apostles. We believe that you are the Christ. That's faith. That is that intellectual commitment. He is saying the right thing. He believes the right thing. And then Jesus says, great. Let me tell you what it means that I am the Christ. Let me tell you how deep that statement goes. And he begins to talk about the cross. And St. Peter takes him aside and says, Lord, you can't talk like that. One, you're bumming us all out. Two, we're not sure. The Christ can't really be crucified. So, you're kind of like pushing us into a weird spot. And Jesus rebukes him immediately and publicly. Because what St. Peter had was faith, what he didn't have was fidelity. He had the ability to say, yeah, this is the Christ, but he didn't have the ability to say, and I will follow the Christ wherever he leads me. I will follow the Christ to the cross. Look at our first reading. This is one of the suffering servant canticles in Isaiah. The deeply mysterious and mystical passages where the prophet suddenly turns to the first person, which you never see in prophetic literature, and speaks as somebody personally suffering for God. These are passages we use regularly during Lent, passages that are clearly fulfilled in Jesus. The Lord God opens my ear that I may hear. Faith. I believe the Lord has told me something. I am receiving revelation from God. That's faith. This is an intellectual commitment. This is from God. And I have not rebelled, have not turned back. Whatever he heard from God, not an easy thing. Based on the rest of the passage, we can believe that the prophet was told to go into the public square, be condemned, be physically assaulted, make all of the enemies everywhere. That's what it seems to be. But there's faith. I believe that God is telling me to do that. And then he says, I have not rebelled, I have not turned back. I gave my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who plucked my beard. My face I did not shield from buffets and spitting. Fidelity. I believe God has told me to do this thing, and I am following through with it. I am doing what it requires me to do, including when it is very difficult, when it is very hard. Why is he able to do it? The Lord God is my help, therefore I am not disgraced. He is near who upholds my right. If anyone wishes to oppose me, let us appear together. The prophet knows pistis ha theos. He knows that God is faithful, that God shows the same fidelity to us that we want to show to him, except that God does it perfectly. God is perfectly faithful. God never walks away from us. God never abandons us. And so when the prophet has faith, God is telling me this thing, he is also able to have fidelity. And I'm going to follow through with it because God always follows through with me. Go back to St. James. When he says that faith without works is dead, he is saying faith without fidelity is dead. If I make this intellectual commitment, what does that mean if I don't follow through with it? What does it mean if I don't follow through with it? If I stand before the altar of God and make vows in a marriage ceremony, but I'm unable to walk with my spouse in the good times and the bad, what's the point of those vows? If I stand here in church on Sunday and I say the creed, and I say I believe all of the right things, but then when God asks me to do something difficult, I'm unable to do it, or I turn my back, or I rebel, what does it mean that I believe the creed? This is not about devotion versus social justice, which is where Catholics will get really turned around when we talk about faith and works. This is about believing something with all of my heart and soul to the point that my life is so marked by it that I have to respond and I have to carry it out and I have to walk in the ways of God. It's so much deeper than just an intellectual commitment. It's our life. It's giving our life to God. Now, any married couple who has lived out this fidelity, particularly in difficult times, will tell you that it has deepened their marriage. That their marriage is stronger because they went through something difficult together. The same is true with faith. We start with the minimum. We start with faith. St. James doesn't say this, but if we have works without faith, then we're a government NGO. Right? Or we're a government agency, we're a non-governmental charity organization. It doesn't, okay, great, you're doing things, but what meaning does it have? Faith is the necessary starting point. We do have to believe in God. We do have to start with the tenets of the creed. But fidelity is the fruit. Fidelity is the joy. As a married couple will tell you, if you follow through with God, if you believe in him, and then if you go through difficult parts in your faith, where you have doubts or you have struggles, or maybe you did rebel and turn your back, but then came back to God, your faith is so much stronger. Because that fidelity portion helps you better understand the faithfulness God has for you. Going through something difficult with the Lord helps you understand that God is always faithful, that God will not abandon you. Going through that difficult point helps you to own your faith. And you will see, as married couples do, you will see the fruit and the depth. You will see the grace and the joy. You will see the happiness and you will see the fulfillment. God is faithful. Pistis ha theos. God is faithful to you. Always. And our responsibility, if we believe in God, if we believe in all the tenets of the faith, our responsibility is to do our best to be faithful to him.